London. After midnight vertical bar. The vanishing reels that haunted Hollywood forever. Fog comes blowing off the river. A slow silvery tide that hushes the cobblestones and deadens the wheels of the last hansom cab as it rattles toward the far bridges, by telling them we are once again on the march, that there are men alive and afoot in the world, other than rafts and servants. Footfalls echo in the gaslit quiet, first a pair, then another pair, both measured and purposeful, and then stilled under a blackened archway where raggedy posters separate from the bricks. The iron gates at the end of the tiny alley groan and grind open with all the reluctance of an angry door from which 100 years of dust and memories has just decided to flee. Dampness wafts out with a sour sweetness of rot and black mold, and after it a dry, acrid smarminess like burnt emulsion, the haunting smell of aged film left too near a lamp. A lantern sways its delicate wooden balance. A gloved hand, a trembling circle of light foot to foot, refuses the walk toward the house. The boards remain cold as a long-held grudge. Dust rises and dances in the lantern beam, whirling in slow galaxies that collapse as a breath from the lips breaks the room. The first investigator is not merely listening per se, but listening with his whole being. His shoulders rise and fall as the house subtly reacts. Deep within the building, something ticks at an odd patience. Not the hearth clock itself, but a smaller, more mechanical heartbeat. On either side of the passage, boxes are piled high, and they remind you of coffins covered in twine, tagged in labels, whose ink has bled into incomprehensible smears. A moth flutters out from a seam and disappears into the dark, devoured by a mouth no wider than shadow. The others come in behind two stomping paces, their soles clicking out a beat that vibrates against the thin plaster walls. Their faces are dim with mist, the shadows of wraiths, their collars moist with dew. The flickering light of the lantern sweeps the edges of a gilt frame that once cradled a proud portrait and now clings a scab of empty canvas sewn through by mold, and draft curls round their ankles, cold fingers asking the lead man to wait at a small door. Inside a room waits that still recalls its days as a parlor, the dead fireplace with char that can't be reconciled to the timeline in the city's records, the chairs that dip as though conspiring to whisper together, and the piano with a single key pressed down like a missing tooth. The ticking comes nearer and becomes odder, less like a clock and more like a friction film starting to run through a gate, the scrape of sprockets against a strip of memory. There's that projector stand, and not projectors. There's a tipped-over director's chair with a split canvas seat abandoned. A square of wall is rinsed pale where a screen used to hang. Spread out on the table dramatically, as though placed there for an audience, is a wire-bound dented canister. Nothing is facing up, just a shard of card vibrating on the rim in 3 fragile layers. The lead detective's hot breath fogs up the lantern's glass as he gingerly places it down and reaches his hand to touch the can. The bite of the wire leaves a red parenthesis on his glove, and the others stand perfectly still, as though frozen in fears, while he unhooks the twist, as though the act of breathing alone could roll the lid from it. The top clicks shut in a gentle adhesive exhale. A reel tight as a fist tucks inside the film band, glossy at the edge, and matter from the fingertips pressing too firmly and too often. He draws nearer, squinting to make out the traces of ink around the edge, and he does not have to complete the letters to read the title. A shiver runs through the wooden floor like the weighted footfall of a man deciding which heel to rest on. Street gaslight falls in on the window, its feeble flurries rocking between bars, as a second pulse wells up in the hall, the rasp of something being slowly drawn over plaster, a long upright mark made without chalk or pen. The lamp is raised, the room is tilted up along with it. In the mirror above the mantel that no longer holds anything, the investigators stand in a half-circle exact, and yet for the breath that condenses upon one mouth before any of the others. There is only the space of air between themselves and their reflections, but that air is filled in the mirror. A dark figure in a long black coat and a hat with a brim as sharp as a blade leans forward, his head cocked just short of movement. The face is a mask, or a piece of flesh with a memory of a mask, eyes shining like they were painted in lamp-black teeth. that are too long to be tidily folded away, a smile that looks like it was whittled from a nightmare in which smiling was a menace. The head of the search party raises the lantern to the mantle, and the thing raises its head higher so as not to wither the skull his mother sits on, and he sees the figure in the spiked crown who was Bed King predominate over the figure tranquil in its monk's cowl. Okay, mother, he will avenge you. The bearded, sorrowful figure, he'll have to stand on his toes to look at. What were her last words to him? Macro strip. Level, asterisk. Pity and terror. New paragraph, empty room. The fog is blowing against the windows like some hoary sod, through membranes of which the river has made up its mind no longer to be composed of water, but only of air. The house draws breath. The door in the hallway swings open by a finger's breadth. The first twist arrives unannounced. The parlor itself changes its dimensions, as if a whole room of actors had suddenly found the light. The walls step back. The piano loses a layer of dust and is coated with a layer of moist varnish. The air takes on the odors of the silent era of shellac and grease paint, and the hot animal heat of men in heavy wool standing under hot lamps. There is a camera where there was not a camera before, the wooden-bodied talisman, with a crank that turns itself with a grumpy kind of grace. There is no hand upon it, but it moves stumbling, making a familiar and shocking sound, like a fingertip being drawn along fresh teeth. The film in the can shivers a shiver. The lead investigator feels through the table and into his bones. He sets it gently on the table, but the vibration persists. The flat screen is mounted on a projector stand, where a projector a breath ago wasn't a loop of apparition bolted into wood. Its lamp is not lit. Its shutter kisses itself with dumb, exact precision. Yet a ray opens the wall and feels there. Dust swirls like a shimmering cone that ought to be light, but is only intention. On the wall, the blanched rectangle sucks the room in, flickers it out, accumulates the room's flickers as it has observed them. The parlor becomes a movie theater with no screen, and on that rectangle, a city comes to life. Gas lamps, a fog-bound street ingrained that tastes of soot. Down the middle strides a man in a tall hat, his legs moving in angles. There's virtually no stepping as his knees brush past each other with a soundless staccato that is menace the way breath is body. Faces come and fade at the edges of the frame, a set of hawkers with mouths for cries that no ear catches. A newsie flicking a sheaf of headlines that rustle sans paper. A woman under an umbrella that had no light. The vampire drives past them as one past tombstones, not ignoring but appropriating. He raises his chin and all the lamplight angles in toward him, as if the flames somehow want to fit in. The second so urged totes the crank, a learned reflex from a past life, but there is no crank to tote. The film unspools as a closed loop that exists only in the urgency of its own showing. The tall one studies the walls, the mirror, the darkened projector, the reel they carried from the auctioneer's crate that same morning, images of which return in rapid staccato sequence, along with the crate far too small really to hold it, its tag spattered with water stains, but still stamped with the letters at Hollywood. The house where they currently live was formerly the estate of a property for a studio's London shooting unit, a place where costumes slept and props basked in the warmth of having been handled. It housed the rumor out there in its beams that the reels destroyed in the fire had not burned all the way through. Down there in its cellar, that rumor had been planted and had grown into a path to this table up here now. The second bending corrects in the glass. The man on the screen raises his face, and the mask is more than a mask. Or if it is a mask, the mask's smile is now the skin's. He stares through the crowd in the frame, through the lamps, through the fog that was applied to the stage, but which breathes as if conceived, and stares out not at the screening room, but into the mirror. The reflections of the investigators appear with slightly hunched shoulders, whose blink rates do not correspond to the alleged blink rates of their own eyes, with a fifth figure represented in a group of four. The vampire is behind them there, and also in front of them, and also not anywhere in the air, where they breathe coldly against nothing. The canister's lid is placed upon the table so the lead man can use both his hands to keep his shaking hand steady, but even as he does, the lid rocks back and forth as if the table pulses. He touches the edge of the film and it's warm. The warmth creeps through his thumb, departs in a slow burn that stops around the wrist when he raises his hand. Frames flicker in his head so that his eyes seem to be threaded. A street, a window, a lace curtain coat swaying slow. His pulse beats in time with the pace of the phantom. The air is heavy with the smell of damp ash, the chemical sweetness of nitrate wanting heat. A door slams authoritatively somewhere below the house. There are footsteps in the wall, footsteps that do not hurry and yet are sure to arrive. The depressed piano key rises and another lowers, and the instrument plays a solitary scale as though deepening into itself. The not here camera whispers in choked irregular wheezes as if its bellows were kicked in decades before, but is resentfully performing under duress. Down the corridor, a pillar of mist sways into the room sluggish and unsteady. It snakes along the bulk-footed floor, licking at the edges before it peels back, just like a skirt to step over a puddle. We see a mass of people on screen, their expressions scrambled by panic, into the specific mask horror movies have taught the world to make. They gaze up and the camera tilts up, forcing the viewer's neck to tilt up too. Far above, a window opens and a figure moves across it, as a shadow moves over a sundial, less walking than an impact. The vampire slouches against the sill like a lord on the sumptuous parapet. Two figures of silent era acting step into the frame, their bodies fluent in the broad grammar of the theater, their gestures oversized for small spaces, but perfect for the lens that have recorded the history of dread. They don't direct to the man in the window, but to the people looking at that man. A bell somewhere in the house rings once. The mirror snatches at the ring and converts it into a shiver that dances the silver as though small fish were swimming just behind. The lead sleuth sees not himself, but the version that the film favors. His lantern is held higher, his eyes are wider, his lips form a prayer in silence. Behind that ideal self, there is a door that opens onto an alley that is not the alley they entered from, but a gaslit lane from 60 years earlier, its bricks wet with the phosphor light caught in minuscule galaxies. He steps backward, and the heel of his boot catches the edge of some other room. And that room isn't a room, but a set. Flats hammered into brick shapes jut into sightlines. A painted backdrop of clouds spirals at a corner. Empty catwalks frame the stage with unused nets that haven't caught anything since a stuntman just missed by inches. The lamp's ring falls on a chalk X on the floor. Someone did meet their fate after midnight, leaving a script not their own. The investigators are inside the film of the film, or perhaps the film is inside them, and it gets harder and harder to tell which is the brunette and which is the wig. The third struggle is with something more straightforward than the poltergeist paper. A ledger is open across a desk, and on its ink-bleed lines, we learn a crate was sent to this address the week before a certain warehouse fire across the ocean. Costumes and props, the ledger notes. The crate's contents are at an angle that shows no respect for the concept of a margin beside the phrase. Someone has scribbled in pencil a line crossed out and rewritten reels. The hand that wrote the second version bore down so hard that it sliced all the way through the paper. Down the cut flies a black grit that may be soot or film that traveled where it shouldn't, that stayed. There are footfalls to the door, but they do not enter. The officers swivel as one, the lantern light sliding along suits tailored for a different decade. A thin, tall man stands, a cane he carries only for the sense of rhythm. The tip knocked once in a measure of 3. There is the sound of thread too tightly drawn as the hem of his coat skims the floor. That face twists as it tries to find a contrite expression, but can't find one that fits until it lands on glee tinged with hunger underneath. His eyes catch real and soften. They catch mirror and sharpen. He raises his hand, sunlight resting in his palm, as if it were a captured beast. The house rejects the moment with a gust. Its flame flutters, leaps blue, and then stabilizes. The projector that is and is not coughs to life, sends forth not light, but a mere recollection of light. And in that recollection, the vampire turns to them with an unhurried air, and opens his jaws softly with a tenderness reserved for other occasions. The silent era actors jostle in the background, caught off balance like a muscle contorted by a cramp, their damp wrists hanging limp like puppets unplugged. The head detective feels the reel gets even hotter in his hands and understands in silence that the film plans to finish itself with whatever life is left in the room. He reaches a decision that in dream as well as reality is akin to a knife edge, the torching of that for which they searched. His hands work with a gentleness born out of an affection for the very thing he intends to destroy. He places the edge of the reel near the lantern chimney, not over the flame, but near enough to feel its warmth in his mouth. The nitrate knows that to do and does it with relish. Then a snake of smoke writes itself up, and a line of flame sped along the coil, flickering over it as a tongue scans a prayer. The first frame bubbles and burns at the corners, and the picture on the wall twitches, as if someone slapped the screen with an open hand. The vampire stirs, not bothering to consider the etiquette of doors. He passes in front of the projector like a knife passing through water. He enters the parlor as well as downwards from a coach he disdains to praise. The air grows cold around him. The fog inside the room lightens as though the moon has found it. The detectives, the flock without a shepherd, slide away. The leader is now hugging the reel between both hands in the way you would hold a live thing you wanted to choke to death. The fire escalates and a noise starts that is as familiar to any archivist as it is terrifying, a high mewling scream, not unlike kittens trapped in a bag, the sound of film letting go of its tongue. The life or death moment comes not with a fanfare, but with a breath that cannot be exhaled. The vampire is so near that the lantern glints in each fang with rusted gold. It does not reflect him. Instead, it reflects an empty parlor devoid of danger, but full of men who do not really exist. Londoners who have left and come back merely for an audience. The camera overhead winds without assistance up there too, and it shoots slightly slower than real time, so that every motion outstays its welcome by a fraction of a second, turning hands into fluttering leaves, turning fear into a kind of choreography. Long fingers stretch out toward the reel, as if wanting to retrieve a heart that has been removed during an unauthorized operation. His nails slide over the film, and the fire recedes for a brief moment in the vigor of his touch. Then it gutters under a breath that's not the houses or the investigators or the cities, as if the coffin of the Thames had opened and taken a draught. The flame dwindles to a coal. The coal tears across the celluloid with an insatiable frenzy carousing while there is still time. The vampire presses its mouth against it and sucks, and the coal shivers on the verge of going out. The senior investigator does what men do whenever they are at a loss, though never when they are on the spot and expected to get a grip on themselves. He removes the top of the lantern and breathes thrust after secretion of light heart right onto that film, right onto the thing that is happening on the screen this very moment. The whole world turns white, and then it isn't anymore, and heat rushes into the web of his wrists with furious love. The reel howls softly to itself and buckles into one another, the coils of which now hang like the exposed bones of an animal. The vampire does recoil not as a man does, but as Hellward yanks a negative from its place and it shrinks from the air. He threads his way back through the non-existent door when he needs to. The faces of the silent actors shiver, their smiles rips which get mended and ripped again. Their gestures become emptied of the syntax they had learned merely arms in some place. The house takes sides in a language that only houses seem to understand. It shuts shutters that don't have hinges. It breathes out soot through seams in its skin, and it allows rain to enter through flaws that had been too shy to show themselves before. The fog within deepens to milk to wool to tapestry, then parts gold to lace, as if a hand had plucked, shaken it down from the ceiling. The gas lamps on the street without flare higher, longer shadows above them, into which the forms of those who fled London a lifetime ago remanifest. Footsteps in the street quicken slow to a stop. All the citizens of Mist remember the terror they have never put to rest in life, the terror that keeps them where they are, makes them watch as others writhe. The reel expires with a last gasp that is as human a sigh as any. The fire gorges itself and trembles to rest as a small hissing cradle licking feebly at softened metal. And the projector is and isn't, coughs once and stops, and the wall is just wall again. In the mirror, the crowd thins and disappears, carrying the investigators off from the only copies of themselves that this film would tolerate. Those musings raise their lanterns and lower them as if bowing, then simply go still. The vampire remains a dark smudge on the silvering, a bruise no hand can rub clear. He moves his hat brim in greeting, after where no one is sitting, and withdraws slowly enough to see, yet quickly enough to remain in doubt. The house takes in the end, with a shiver that rattles long-buried nails. Shavings of plaster drift in a straight line, as though gravity has suddenly gone full tilt and smart, and settle on the ashes of a rolled thin century. The lead investigator can no longer feel his palms, and has no regret about that numbness. All the others get up only when the fog is gone at their knees, as if the tide had done what it came for. The lantern's flame resumes its modest manner, recovers itself. A moth in the hallway tests the air, as if the new law had been emblazoned there instead. They emerge into a street heard for the very first time. The city's breath resumes. A bell tolls in the distance, its iron voice resounding in the moisture. The fog holds a reluctance in its hem, but gives up the road, and you can see a bridge, and beyond it, a darker band that might be river, or might only be the absence of light. The house behind them respects itself in silence. A single shutter claps, and choosing, however, self-respect before complaint is silent. And the ending that has to come does with a tenderness that won't indulge in spectacle. They leave with the canister, which is now a misshapen metal bowl, its edges crimped like flower petals by heat. This label, once brave enough to name what was inside, is now just soot stuck to the edge. The commander looks back, and now there's nothing at that doorway except for the promise of memory. A woman, the fur-shouldered, mist-shrouded sort across the street, stands at a window and flattens her palm at the glass, then lets a curtain fall. A cab goes by, and the breath of the horse is like white lace draped from the bit. The city has permitted what has occurred, for it has always permitted them. The story will eventually circulate as such tales do, whispered in alleys, reported in a paragraph that never carries a byline, and given fuller shape by a clerk who cleans theaters at night and reads dust for meaning. It will nestle up to the old rumor, the one that stretches across oceans to traverse vaults where film cans sleep with numbers in lieu of names. It will insist that something survived the fire and then came forth to take what it needed in order to finish the dying. It will tell how a man with a wound that was his smile smiled upon more than one mirror, and by went out clanking into the night to slit his own sundered throat. It will keep open the question of whether reels combust entirely when they are made of more than just plastic and light. The fog clears, the reel burns. Midnight chooses silence because the hour deserves it. A door to a cupboard in the parlor above hangs and swings before closing and stays closed for decades. In a point midway across the world, in a city that has reinvented resurrection, a bulb blows suddenly, and no one can account for it. The head of the investigating team is sleeping soundly, but he is not dreaming. Maybe he is dreaming of keys which aren't those of his house. A crescent sliver still hooks the corner of our minds like a quarter stuck in a pool drain. It never comes out, and we never talk about it. The city gets back to the job of being old. It mingles with the fog before dawn, as if in shame for what it has made known. The footsteps sound in new alleys lighter, not worn down by a fear of dust. Elsewhere, a door groans open to admit only a normal night. On the mirror above, a second mantle, nothing but just the reflection of a lamp. And that lamp, the flame of it swings sidewise for a moment, as though brushed by an invisible breath, and swings back again. Somewhere the river raises up its small wave and lets it fall. And somewhere is a can empty of nothing left standing, where someone put it forever undisturbed. And yet the arch of a grin lies in the grain of aged wood. The moths orbit the spots where light used to dance, and every breath of fog lapping up the water as it rolled in brought curled within its dew-damp embrace a thin skein of an acrid, sweetish nothing that spoke of something well worth seeing, that is consumed, and of how the half-seen is occasionally the more reliable ghost. The legend becomes part of the city's countless others, settling into the spaces between stone and soot. Loneliness stalks the gaslit alleys with a cane it uses only to beat time. For the house that pretended to be a set now pretends only to be a house. Masquerading, always masquerading in someone's mind whenever the hinge whines and the boards creaks and the film of breath on the cold glass holds the imprint, a heartbeat too long. And this is the way that it ends for now, because here an ending is an interruption, not a conclusion. The fog parts to show midnight, and this thin alley between lamps sees a little thing. No one will enter in their leisure. A moth lands on the soot-soft window of a door. Too knowing stays a while and is gone. The city doesn't fight its silence. The silence is the real, the one that cannot be categorized, the one that plays in a continuous loop, and in every room where laughter once drowned, so the larger room could be filled with fear. The story reaches the edge of the cobbled street and does not go back indoors. It knows that every time a breath steams the glass, someone will glance over a corner for a hat brim and see nothing and still take a step backwards. The dissolving reels have finished dissolving. What's left is a room the shape of a film canister on a table in a ruined parlor, a room heat-warped and patient, a perfect hole punched in dust where light was laid down. The house maintains that circle and doesn't know it or care. The city walks past. The river forgets because to forget is the river's role. Midnight elects to keep the secret to himself instead of speaking it aloud. And in the silence that should come only to films and even earlier legends, the sound is a bit like the faint after-screech of reels now stilled, and like the whisper of masks released from faces that carried them far too long, and like the settling soft and contented of ashes that will not be asked to rise.